Somewhere beneath the shifting sands of North Africa lies a secret that was never intended to be rediscovered. It is the record of a crime so absolute that its perpetrators didn't just seek a body, they sought to delete the very soul of a rival nation. This is not merely a chronicle of ancient warfare, but a blueprint for how a civilization is systematically unmade, leaving behind a heavy, unnatural void. If you stand among the sun-scorched ruins today, you will not hear the echoes of a lost empire or the songs of vanished heroes. You will encounter the profound weight of a people who were not just defeated, but treated as if they had never existed at all. For over a century, the Mediterranean served as a chessboard for two titans. On one side stood Rome, the rising iron machine of the West, a culture built on rigid discipline, relentless expansion, and an uncompromising will to dominate. On the other was Carthage, the wealthy, sophisticated merchant queen of the sea, a civilization defined by trade, naval brilliance, and an ancient, sprawling heritage. They had already endured two brutal conflicts that left jagged scars on the collective psyche of both nations. By the year 149 BC, Carthage was a shadow of its former self. Its navy was dismantled, its foreign colonies were stripped away, and its influence was strangled by suffocating treaties. Yet, this weakened state terrified the Roman Senate more than a strong rival ever could. Fear is a master architect of destruction. In the marble halls of Rome, a single, chilling refrain began to dominate every debate: Carthage must be destroyed. It wasn't a tactical suggestion, it was a psychological drumbeat preparing a nation for an outcome they had not yet dared to name. The Roman senators looked across the water and saw not a neighbor, but a ghost that refused to stay buried. They understood that as long as the name Carthage existed, their own supremacy felt incomplete. They didn't want a victory, they wanted an ending. They sought to finish a story that had haunted their fathers and grandfathers for generations. The final conflict did not begin with the clash of shields or the thunder of charging horses. It began with a series of cold, calculated demands designed to break a people's spirit before a single sword was drawn. This was a war of psychology long before it was a war of iron. Roman envoys arrived not to negotiate, but to extract. Their first demand was a test of the heart. Rome required 300 children of the Carthaginian nobility as hostages. Desperate to avoid total ruin and believing that compliance would buy peace, the families yielded. They watched with shattered hearts as their sons and daughters were loaded onto ships, disappearing into the vast interior of Italy. The city's future was being extracted, one life at a time, sent into a darkness from which they would never return. But the demands did not stop there. Next, Rome demanded the surrender of every remaining weapon and suit of armor within the city walls. In a final, desperate gesture of hope, the Carthaginian people emptied their armories. They handed over 200,000 sets of gear and thousands of catapults. Wagons filled with the tools of defense rolled out of the city gates and into the Roman camps. The citizens stood defenseless on their ramparts, believing their total submission would finally buy them the right to survive. They had given up their children and their steel. They had nothing left but their homes and their memories. Only after these humiliations were complete did the Roman envoys reveal their true intent. They delivered an impossible ultimatum that revealed the darkness of their ambition. The entire population must abandon their ancient city. Every man, woman, and child was ordered to relocate 10 miles inland, away from the sea that had given them life. Then, they were to watch from the hills as their homes, their temples, and their world-renowned harbors were leveled to the ground. For a seafaring nation whose identity was forged in the salt and spray of the Mediterranean, this was a sentence of cultural extinction. It was the moment of realization. The enemy didn't want their gold, they wanted their identity scrubbed from the earth. When the envoys returned with this news, the atmosphere in Carthage didn't collapse into surrender. It erupted into a feral, panicked defiance. The gates were sealed, the bridges were broken, and a city of nearly 500,000 people prepared for a siege they knew they could not win. They had no weapons, no allies, and no hope of reinforcements, but they had the burning realization that they were fighting for the right to have ever existed. The fear that had paralyzed them was replaced by a cold, industrious rage. They were no longer a broken state, they were a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. Inside the walls, the city transformed into a frantic factory of survival. Having surrendered their metal, the citizens turned to the only resources they had left. They melted down sacred temple statues, household vessels, and ancestral heirlooms to forge new blades. The constant ring of hammers on anvils became the heartbeat of a population fighting for its last breath. The air grew thick with the scent of molten bronze and the sweat of people who understood they were building their own coffins. Every citizen, from the wealthiest merchant to the youngest laborer, became a gear in a machine of desperate resistance. When supplies for catapult cords ran out, the women of Carthage made a sacrifice that would be remembered for millennia. They gathered in the public squares and cut off their long hair, weaving the human tresses into thick, strong ropes for the war machines. It was a scene of collective resolve, thousands of women with shorn heads, a visible symbol of a people who refused to surrender their identity even as the world closed in. They were no longer fighting for a political state, they were fighting for the ground beneath their feet and the gods who watched over them. This was the moment Carthage chose to die on its own terms rather than live on Rome's. The siege became a slow, merciless process of attrition that lasted for 3 long years. Under the command of Scipio Aemilianus, the Roman legions realized that the city would not fall to a simple assault. They constructed a massive stone mole across the harbor, a feat of engineering designed to choke the city. This wall of stone cut off the last lifeline of supplies, turning the vibrant metropolis into a cage. Hunger and exhaustion began to hollow out the population. The vibrant markets turned silent, and the grand public spaces became waiting rooms for the dead. Yet, the defense refused to break. They clung to the ruins of their city with a tenacity that astonished the Romans, who had expected a quick collapse. For 3 years, the walls held against the most efficient military machine the world had ever seen. The Romans were forced to endure the North African heat and the constant, stinging raids of a desperate enemy. It was a period of agonizing tension, where the outcome seemed certain yet the cost grew higher with every passing day. The Roman soldiers looked up at the high walls and saw a people who had been stripped of everything but their will, and in that will, there was something terrifying. It was the resilience of a culture that knew it was being deleted from time. In the spring of 146 BC, the outer defenses finally buckled. What followed was a devastating 6-day struggle through narrow, winding streets and tall apartment buildings. The urban layout of Carthage, once a marvel of ancient planning, became a labyrinth of slaughter. The legions were forced to fight for every block, every building, and every rooftop. They cleared paths by any means necessary, turning a metropolis into a graveyard of stone and ash. Each house was a fortress, each room was a final stand. There was no room for mercy in the narrow alleys where the air was choked with the dust of falling limestone. Soldiers fought through the upper floors of buildings while the streets below were filled with the debris of a collapsing world. The Romans didn't just advance, they dismantled the city as they moved through it. They set fire to the tall structures, and as the buildings crumbled, they buried both the defenders and the civilians hiding within the cellars. The screams of the dying were drowned out by the roar of the conflagration and the rhythmic thud of Roman boots. It was a systematic cleansing of a space, a street-by-street erasure of a living society. The fire burned so hot that it fused the very stones together, creating a landscape of charred rubble. By the end of the 7th day, only 50,000 survivors remained from a population that had once exceeded 500,000. These broken people, starving and traumatized, were led away into the shadows of history. They were sold into slavery, their names and cultural memory largely lost to the passage of time. But even this overwhelming victory was not enough for the Roman Senate. Their orders went far beyond military conquest.
But Rome is
They commanded that the city be leveled, not a single monument was to be left standing. The victory had to be absolute, the site had to be made unrecognizable. 4 months, Roman soldiers labored with a grim, bureaucratic focus. They didn't just burn the city, they tore down the temples and the massive walls, stone by stone. They ensured that the skyline which had dominated the Mediterranean for centuries would vanish forever. While historical debate surrounds the literal plowing of salt into the earth, the ritual cursing of the ground was a recorded reality. The site was rendered a void, a forbidden zone where life was no longer permitted to flourish. It was a symbolic ritual of finality, an act meant to prevent any future rebirth of the Carthaginian spirit. The message to the rest of the world was clear: this place is gone, and it must never return. The city was not merely defeated, it was systematically unmade. Its libraries were scattered, its gods were absorbed or forgotten, and its language faded under the dominance of a new tongue. For centuries, the story of this lost world was told almost exclusively through the writings of the people who destroyed it. We see the brilliance of Carthage only through the fearful and biased lens of its conquerors, leaving us to wonder what truths were lost in the smoke. This deliberate erasure stands as one of history's most profound lessons. It demonstrated that with enough cold calculation, an entire civilization could be wiped from the map. Even Scipio Aemilianus, standing on the hills overlooking the burning ruins, was struck by a chilling realization. He turned to his friend and quoted the Iliad, speaking of the day when holy Troy would fall. He realized that if a city as ancient and magnificent as Carthage could be reduced to nothing in a matter of days, then no empire, not even Rome, could claim immortality. He sought his own future in the smoke of his enemy's home. Today, visitors walk among the sun-bleached stones and broken columns of a site that was once the center of the world. The tragedy lies not just in the fall of the city, but in the fact that it provided a terrifying template for the future. It showed how to erase a rival so thoroughly that even its ghost is denied a place to rest. It serves as a warning that the foundations of our civilizations are often built upon the intentional forgetting of those who came before. The wind still moves across those quiet ruins, carrying the weight of an untold story that refuses to be completely silenced. The void left by Carthage is not an empty one. It is a space that speaks of the fragility of memory and the ruthlessness of power. It is a reminder that societies are far more fragile than we like to believe, and that the permanence we see in our own skyscrapers and monuments is an illusion. Beneath every thriving modern city lie the silenced layers of those who once thought their walls would stand forever. The destruction of Carthage reminds us that the greatest danger is not always the army at the gates, but the moment when a power decides that coexistence is no longer an option. The ruins are a testament to the idea that peace built upon the complete erasure of another carries a heavy, lasting cost. It is a cost paid in the loss of human potential and the narrowing of our collective history. We are all, in one way or another, walking across the remains of someone else's world, building our dreams upon ground that was once soaked in the hopes of people who believed they would be remembered. To look at these ruins is to recognize that history is not just a record of what happened, but a record of what managed to survive the fire. The wind continues to blow across the North African coast, carrying both sand and memory. It reminds us that we must listen closely to the past, even when it has been stripped of its voice. To remember is the only way to ensure that the stories of those who were meant to be forgotten are eventually told. The stones of Carthage may be broken, but they still hold a warning for any power that believes it can delete its rivals from the book of time. In the end, time is the only empire that truly lasts, and it eventually humbles even the most absolute of conquerors.